Epochs!
Once you get into this period in the aftermath of the death of, say, of Basil II, you start to notice dynastic instability. And like you mentioned with the twin empresses, Theodora and Irene, there's a lot of power play in Constantinople. And what begins to happen? When emperors come to power in the city, they pay favors to politicians and generals. Vast expense, and probably the two worst emperors for this were Constantine Monomachos, which I believe was Constantine the Ninth, if memory serves correct, and the first Ducas emperor. Those two almost single-handedly emptied the treasury. And so what happens in any kind of imperial context when the treasury is emptied? What's the first thing that gets neglected?
Well, the army.
Exactly. So this fantastic thematic and tagmatic military force that has been, the bedrock of Byzantine success for the previous century and a half, isn't being neglected. The themes aren't supported monetarily from Constantinople in the same way. The levies are reduced in quality and size. The armaments are sort of old and ragged. The drill and training is nowhere near as as thorough as it once was. And even the imperial tagmatic units are themselves neglected, although because of their proximity to the city and because their commanders obviously close to the nodes of power, they still receive their salaries and their finance, but it's still not ideal. It is far from what the empire needs.
Yeah.
And so in the context of we have the emergence of one Romanos Diogenes, who in fact was a general who had rebelled against the imperial authority, and he was basically given two choices: either marry the empress, or be imprisoned and probably have his nose cut off or something, or tongue ripped out. So he's like, oh, I'll marry the princess or the empress, whatever. There's a better choice. And even though he himself was a general and a popular general, there were probably more capable men comparatively. But I mean, put it this way, Nicephorus Botaniates comes to mind, or trying to think of who Alexios' adversary was in the Civil War. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Like, there was other probably more capable military leaders, but Diogenes was himself quite a good general and accounted himself well. So the empire was in good hands. But this coincides with the emergence of the Turks, the early Seljuk Turks. So at this point, sort of around this, or prior to this time, they had basically wiped out the previous ruling dynasty in Iran, which is obviously an Arabic Islamic dynasty. Can't actually remember which dynasty it was, but they defeat them somewhere just on the southeastern periphery of the Caspian Sea, and they come to dominate Iran. This entity is actually known as the Grand Seljuk, like the big Seljuk entity. And from Iran, from what is modern day essentially Azerbaijan and parts of northern Iraq, Seljuk Turks start sort of trickling and migrating into Anatolia, and they start to raid the cities. For instance, they sack what we know is Kayseri today, but Caesarea Mazaka, which is in Cappadocia. And these raids become more and more intense, and they start to pressure the kingdom of Georgia, and sort of at this point Armenia is partitioned. Part of it's within the empire, and part of it's not in the empire. But these Armenian border forts are being taken, particularly Ani and Manzikert obviously lost it at a time. So Romanos Diogenes tries to mobilize the army, marches eastwards. And two things: one, that the army itself is in a somewhat dilapidated state, and two, he marches eastwards with this because he's got he's obviously the empress's husband. He goes with this massive baggage train, and that really hampers morale. The idea that this army is neglected and we're marching with this massive elaborate baggage train hardly bodes well. So they march east and they attempt an engagement in eastern Anatolia at a place called Manzikert, and he definitely seeks a decisive engagement in order to defeat the Turks. And the battle itself, it's not a huge calamity. It's definitely not a Yarmouk or an Adrianople. It's not the case of 2/3 the army surrounded and massacred. In fact, much of the army in fact survives, because when they arrive at Manzikert, he actually sends about a third of the army on some random sort of side quest to contain another Turkish force, which ends up not even partaking in the battle at all. And then he raised his army into sort of 4 portions: center, left, right, and a vanguard. And he approaches the Turks. Actually, takes the Turkish camp at the start of the battle. Or after the start of the battle, he advances and he takes their camp. And Manzikert, the city itself, ends up being retaken. But then, like, his forces spread too thin, so there's actually a bit of a misunderstanding. He sort of has his officers sort of turn the flags around and blows the horn, but his wings interpret the sign as that the emperor's dead. So
yes,
the troops lose heart, and both flanks are turned by the Turks, and then ultimately it's just sort of him with his tagma, his Varangian guards, the excubatoi, his hetaira, which is a Greek word for bodyguard. And they fight on for the better part of the afternoon, but he actually calls for the vanguard to enter the battle, which is under the command of one Andronicus Ducas, who is the son of John Ducas. That's the other emperor I couldn't think of, the one who with the paying out the donatives and bribing people. But yeah, Andronicus Ducas ignores the emperor's order, marches back to camp, and abandons his emperor. And so basically, a large portion of the army actually survives. But what it does do, it completely breaks the back of the functionality of the East Roman army. Yeah. Basically, Andronicus Ducas takes the army, marches back to the capital for his father's benefit. And Romanus is captured, and there's a bit of a story between Alp Arslan, the Turkish commander, and Romanus have a discussion. Alp Arslan says to Romanus, he says, what would you do to me if I'd captured you? And Romanus says, I probably would have killed you or imprisoned you. And Alp Arslan says to him, well, I'll do something much worse to you. I'll set you free. Knowing how the Byzantines treat their captured emperors. And sure enough, before he even got back to the city, he had his eyes gouged out. And he suffered quite a terrible fate. And I mean, not that he was a bad person necessarily. The records don't suggest as much. He, like many people in his position, didn't deserve that fate. But that leads to the complete crumbling of the Anatolian frontier. And this really, and a lot of people who don't study history don't know this, leads to the conditions of the First Crusade.
Which one of those things that the Byzantines were sort of famous for is the idea that instead of necessarily killing, particularly it only really applied to royalty, but it sort of wouldn't do to kill them. But if you could disfigure them, we talked about Justinian II, didn't we, having his nose cut off? If you could put their eyes out, or cut their ears off, cut their nose off, cut their tongue out,
and confine them to a monastery,
then they certainly can't ever be emperor again. If he's got no tongue, he's got no eyes, he cannot rule. And so, but you haven't actually killed him, so it's not a murder. You haven't committed a murder, but you have done away, effectively, in essence, with your political enemy. So and so it became a thing to sort of put out eyes, cut out tongues a lot.
Yes.
And then put in a monastery forever.
Sadly, Byzantine medieval history is replete with that.
Yeah.
And it does touch on the gruesome when you sort of see it occur so often.
And Justinian is one of the few examples where
he comes back
that happened to him. They cut his nose off, so he's disfigured. He's imperfect. Pardon me. He cannot be emperor, but he came back and did again anyway. But okay. So you're quite right. So this sets up the First Crusade, because it's the Seljuks that take Jerusalem, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Isn't it the Seljuks that are watering their horses in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre?
Yeah. So,
or allegedly.
Well, this is the thing, is that Jerusalem was obviously under the domain of I want to say the Fatimids, but I can't actually remember. But the Caliph, that was resident in Egypt. But due to the sort of the power play of how things were going in Anatolia, and particularly sort of emirs who, for a time pledged their allegiance to Byzantium, to Constantinople, there's a power vacuum. And so on the back of the success that they were experiencing in Anatolia, and that would continue in Anatolia, they did obviously head south as well. And as you say, it comes a point where the Turks do, in fact, occupy Jerusalem.
And that seems to be too much for the Pope back in Rome to stomach.
Yes. And also Antioch and many of those other Levantine cities.
Is it Urban II?
Yeah.
Is it Urban II that calls the First Crusade?
Yeah, the Council of Clermont. Yeah.
Yeah, Urban II. Right. Yeah. And so that's the 1090s, isn't it?
Yeah. So, this thing, it coincides with, in essence, after the collapse of the Eastern frontier, and it doesn't happen instantaneously. For instance, John Ducas and his son Andronicus themselves are captured in a battle in Anatolia, which is ironic. It's actually kind of occurs much the same way, although in their case it was against Roussel, the Frankish adventurer in Anatolia, who actually had himself fought at Manzikert. And the Frankish knights turned on the Byzantines, and it was sort of much of a repeat of the same story.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was somewhere like near modern day Ankara on the Halys River. But an interesting fate, of course, given what Andronicus had did to his emperor years before.
So this is an interesting theme now.
Yeah.
If we're going to end with the events of 1204, it's an interesting theme that Christian people from the West visit Constantinople one way or another, and doesn't necessarily work out well for the Christians that are already there. So in the First Crusade, a lot of it wasn't like the Third Crusade where they rock up by boat on the Mediterranean. They march across the land, and so marched through
the city itself,
through Constantinople. And at that time, who is the emperor?
Well, here's the backstory, right? So I mentioned the father and son Andronic Ducas, right? So they're captured in Cappadocia. So there's massive power vacuum. This also coincides with the fact that one of the surviving generals of the East, Nikephoros Melissenos, was in command of the Turkish mercenaries, and he billets these mercenaries all through Anatolia to use it as a power base. But then when Seljuk Turks rock up on horseback, well, where does the kinship lie? Not with their commander. So this is actually how a large number of Anatolian cities end up sort of basically turning over to the newly arrived Seljuks that were basically thundering across Anatolia following the battle, because there's just no Eastern army. The army, like I said, they weren't necessarily defeated and killed. I mean, they were defeated, but they weren't like killed or massacred. But the Eastern frontier had just totally disintegrated. There was no leadership and standing army. There's one instance, I think, where Alexios Komnenos himself actually fights a battle somewhere in Anatolia and just doesn't have the manpower. He can't rally enough soldiers to stem the tide. He gets recalled to Constantinople. He ends up fighting on behalf of the emperor and ends up fighting a coup attempt. And the battle occurs in modern day sort of Macedonia, somewhere in the southern Balkans there. I just cannot remember for the life of me who he actually ends up fighting, like the Byzantine rebel general. But he wins this battle. He goes back to Constantinople, and basically the emperor tries to strip him of command. So he essentially turns to the rebel forces, and because there's no soldiers in the capital, he becomes emperor. A conspiracy between his mother, Anna Dalaseno, and the then patriarch conspire to put Alexios Komnenos on the throne. So he becomes emperor, and this is sort of in the lead up to like the 1080s, right?
Okay, yeah.
And this is important for the Crusades, because who then attacks Constantinople in a moment of weakness? Well, it's the Normans. You know?
Yeah.
And this
various Frankish knights.
And this matters for afterwards, because he actually fights he almost wins the war from the onset, the Battle of Dyrrhachium, but he suffers a reversal. His troops are surrounded. His Varangians end up being burnt in a little church called the Church of St. Michael. He loses the battle, and Anna Komnena references it in the Alexiad. Her father was covered in cuts and bruises and was fighting the front line, but his own soldiers had to just get him out of the way because he for his own good, he had to survive and fight another day. He'd just been newly crowned emperor, and the Normans under their their leader, under the Hauteville dynasty. So this is Robert Guiscard, Robert the Fox, and his son Beaumont, and they inflict 2 or 3 really severe defeats on the Byzantines. It's only when Robert Guiscard is brought back to Italy because of an invasion from the Germans from the north, and then Beaumont is on his own in Greece. Alexios conspires of a way to actually eventually defeat him in detail. And this Norman-Byzantine animosity bubbles along for like another decade and a half. Eventually, Alexios does evict them out of Greece and out of modern-day Albania, what they call Epirus. But then we roll on to the Crusader period, and at this point, the Turks have taken almost everything in Anatolia. The Greeks hold a few cities on the Black Sea coast and across the Bosphorus, but they've lost everything else. And Pope Urban gives his speech at it is Clermont, isn't it?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah.
And they assemble these knights, and you have all these various contingents from Robert of Flanders, Robert of Normandy. And the reason I mentioned the Normans from before, because there is a Norman contingent, and who else but Beaumont of Toronto and his son Tancred are a very major contingent of the First Crusade. And as you say, they march over land and make their way to the east. You have Raymond of Toulouse, of course, as another Crusader king. No sponsorship from the game, of course. And make their way by foot across to Constantinople.
And they turn up outside Constantinople with tens of thousands of guys.
With tens of thousands, we've got to think like thousands and thousands of knights and tens of thousands of just like infantry and footmen, and then followed by tens and tens of thousands of pilgrims. So this is a teeming mass of people that have rocked up. And Alexios wasn't quite sure he was in for that.
And it's like, okay, we're all Christians, but not the exact same type of Christian, and I wouldn't put it past you guys to do something
untoward.
Untoward. Yeah. So he just wants to sort of ferry them across the Bosphorus as quickly as possible.
Essentially,
But it's a shaky moment.
It is
a very shaky moment, I would have thought. The idea that just because the Frankish or Western Catholic forces, just because we both are Christian, that's no guarantee. That's not really a guarantee that they're going to be.
Well, think
friendly.
About it. If we're going to if you get into the nuts and bolts of it, if you actually follow and read about the Crusade, there was a lot of discord within the Crusader camp itself.
Oh yeah, good, absolutely.
Never mind.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Their dealings with the Byzantines as Orthodox Christians.
So Byzantines are certainly could be an enemy that we're just going to plunder. Certainly, it's possible.
This is why, prior to them being ferried across the Bosphorus by the Byzantine navy, Alexios is smart enough to at least attain fealty, promises of fealty from the Crusader kings, if I can put them that way. I mean, it's probably more true to call them Crusader princes, but I think everyone except Tancred basically gives him an oath.
It's funny. It might be Tancred. There's a very interesting anecdote I always remember. I can't remember the details of it now, but it might have been Tancred or it might have been somebody else. But they had an audience with Alexios, and they're drunk, and he just goes up and sits on Alexios' throne.
Yeah, it is Tancred.
It is Tancred himself who does that. That's pretty.
And the Greek court are just aghast at it.
Well, yeah.
And actually, funnily enough, to his credit, Alexios actually handled it with aplomb.
I just tried to laugh. Well, had no choice but to laugh it off.
Well, basically, I think he said something along the lines. Again, it's a bit apocryphal, but I believe there's like some retort where Alexios said, "It's a heavy burden, isn't it?"
Right.
Because I mean, you got to think it is like the Roman throne. Like it is. There's a lot that goes with it.
I mean, that's extremely rude and brazen, and all very much like a slap in the face or spitting on your shoes or something. It's like, are you declaring war on me? Almost. Almost like that. Are you deposing me? Is that what's happening?
Or trying to belittle me in my
right? Absolutely. A bit humiliating. All sorts of all those things.
The Byzantines were sticklers for pageantry in that sense.
And sure.
Long prior to the cultivation of that in the way that we understand in the West today. I mean, like for example, you're English and we're in England. And you think of like royal pageantry and, when the king gets, when there's like, a monarch passes away or there's a new king as we've had recently here, there's a lot of that, the regality of it all and the splendor of, the horses and the streets and the flags. And it's all very precise. And you got to think that's like hundreds of years of evolution that here. But like in Byzantium, there'd already been a 600-700 year process of that evolving from Diocletian to Alexios Komnenos, if you get my point.
Yeah. So the Crusaders in the First Crusade, they go on and miraculously do take Jerusalem. Is it 1099, isn't it?
Christmas Day, 1099.
Right,
they captured
okay.
the city,
So miraculously.
Or was it New Year's Day? Anyway, like the Charlemagne thing, but I can't remember.
The point is that...
and through a great deal of sufferance and perseverance. I mean, the first success they have is when they recapture Nicaea, which is actually quite, well, I wouldn't say uneventful, but the intervention of the Byzantine navy to sort of cross the sea and capture the city as a coup is a bit of a surprise to the Crusaders. But they end up making their way through Anatolia. They fight off a number of potential ambushes. Where they really have difficulty is on the approach to Antioch and the Battle of Antioch itself.
Right. Yeah.
The crusade could have failed
By
several
rights,
times.
they should have been stopped there, right? You would have thought.
Well, in Antioch, in and around Antioch alone, the crusade could have at least failed 3 times.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, you got to think there was a relieving army being sent. I can't remember who the general was. He was like a Turkish emir from Homs or something like that. You know, marching with a column between 20,000, 30,000 men. And quite literally, the Crusader Knights sort of take the city when his army is like in the horizon, cloud dust bearing down on them, and then they've got the force that was in Antioch before holed up in the citadel. Mind you, they have 90% of their army on the outside wall to protect the wall from the new army coming in to relieve the Arab army that's in the citadel. It's a very, very fraught situation, and they suffer terribly from short provisions. They suffered terribly from famine. You know, like there's a point in time in the siege, I think there's like not even 1,000 fit knights to fight. You know, it's you know, quite an affair for them, but they do eventually persevere and prevail.
There's like this mad suicidal against the odds breakout that works.
Yeah. Well, I think
the fact they got past Antioch, let alone to Jerusalem, let alone taking Jerusalem, you wouldn't have put money on it.
Oh, absolutely not.
You would have said, this is just not happening. It's completely unrealistic.
Absolutely.
But they do it.
They do it. And the thing is, I think with Antioch, if memory serves me correct, I think I want to say it was Raymond Toulouse, but I can't remember exactly. They got a provision out east of Antioch, and this army bears down on them, and you know the foot knights and the infantry sort of form this dense square, and there's so many wounded and injured men. You know, like the women inside are, you know, like getting water from the river and treating the men, and you know the priests are healing the wounded and bandaging men. Like it's that desperate. And then there's the Normans, you know, Tancred and Beaumont, with, you know, 100 diehard knights. They just lower their lances and charge down the hill and totally break the Arab army just through sheer, you know.
Oh, Antioch.
I don't know if bravery is the right word. It's almost insanity.
It is sort of like a suicidal last thing where we're going to go out in a blaze of glory then. Oh, wait, it worked.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, we're not all dead. Wow, okay. Yeah. Onwards.
The cross stands, you know. Yeah.
Isn't it at Antioch that
Ave Maria,
that they find the Holy Spear, don't they?
Yeah.
That pierced Christ's side.
Yeah, the Lance of Longinus.
Yes, the Lance of Longinus. Yeah, they discover it.
Because the papal legate dies, Adhemar dies in that famine in the city. And I can't remember who that priest is, like some crazy priest. Yeah. Like, yes, we found it. And he inspires them into victory.
Hidden under there is the Lance of Longinus. Oh, lo and behold. It actually is. Well, what do you know about that?
Yeah, and he sort of became like the pseudo-religious leader of the crusade up until he was forced to engage in a trial to prove his innocence or his truth. And they made him, I can't remember what it was, they made him like walk on coals or something.
Yeah, something to do with fire, wasn't it?
And
trial by fire.
Yeah, and he got an infection and died. Like, it was agonizing.
I think it's just, it's basically burnt alive. Wasn't it?
Exactly.
It didn't work.
Yeah, he tried, but I mean, really, they take Antioch, and then eventually after they destroy that relieving army, a large number of these cities in Levant voluntarily turn over. They send delegations to the Crusaders, and you know, Tortosa, Beirut, Acre, not Acre, I don't think, but like a lot of them do turn over to the Crusaders, which makes their path down to Jerusalem a lot more straightforward. And then eventually they array their forces outside Jerusalem, and in I wouldn't call it a brief struggle, but
it was relatively brief. I mean, you would think that it wouldn't be insane to think that's going to take 6 months, that's going to take 2 years. Yeah. It could take 5 years to do it, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it was within a fortnight.
And it
was
unbelievable. And so that ushers in the whole period of Outramar, doesn't it? Like the whole Crusader state thing.
Correct, yeah.
Which will actually last longer than our chosen story.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
But so that's sort of a key, sort of unbelievable thing, really, the First Crusade. The more I look at it and the more I read about it, the more fantastic it seems. I mean, it seems fantastic on the first time you hear about it, but the more and more the details you read, and you think it's just, it should have failed 100 different points.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please head over to lotuseaters.com for the full unabridged video.